Hello, welcome back to You Can't Win, episode 4. This week we are going to be discussing political, post-political kind of radicalism or extreme behavior that people get into after they feel they may have exhausted opportunities and whatnot in the political world. So, Donald, why don't you tell us a little bit about this idea that we had?
So I guess last time we talked a bit about the general idea of people kind of coming to awareness of politics and trying to look around for ways that could kind of solve problems in their communities and their lives and stuff. And then how usually that kind of comes up against a limit where there's only so much you can really achieve in that kind of field by yourself, and even in collective action, like it kind of constantly kind of lets you down from using that as a kind of like a solution to kind of like anxieties and things. So I find that, at least for me, I mean, just speaking for myself, the kind of impulse after that, when you kind of realize that there's kind of like a limit to politics, is to try to kind of double down by kind of finding ways that you can kind of push yourself to the limit and push kind of politics to the limit to kind of solve those kind of problems that you were looking for. Like, if you know everyday politics is not going to solve something, so you kind of like turn to something like radical and usually something that it creates like a very, very narrow kind of chain of events where doing something decisive will solve the problem for you. And I think that's something that you see like a huge amount of people that are becoming dissatisfied with politics kind of turning to in different ways. And so like an example, I guess, would be you see people like picking fights a lot online or like just being insulting and rude to people as a way of kind of like I don't know, like resolving that kind of tension where because you kind of imagine this kind of situation where by causing kind of decisive conflict, then you can kind of resolve all the problems at once or something like that, I guess. Yeah, I'm not sure.
So let's kind of create an example here of exactly what we're talking about. So let's say there's someone who has gotten into politics. They have somewhat of a leftist bent or something. They are against like war. They're against income inequality. They want more services for people to be better taken care of by the government and by society at large. And they do a little bit of volunteering, a little bit of canvassing for politicians that seem to be closer to their views than the opposition. And at some point they realize that that's not really getting the job done. They don't see the changes that they were hoping to see as a result of their efforts. So is this what we're talking about, this point where someone feels like they got to get to the next level, or they got to kind of make a certain leap to actually affect those changes?
I think that's true, and I also think that it doesn't necessarily have to be that kind of exact kind of story. I think that's just that maybe that was kind of my story in that kind of but I think that even like a lot of the alt-right stuff comes from that kind of impulse of like seeing people, like realizing that, say, moderate politics is not going to get there. And I think also, I mean, because I think that a lot of the right-wing kind of stuff comes from just assuming that kind of like a far-left politics is impossible. Like, I don't even know if they disagree with it at some level most of the time. I think they just think that it's like basically like Pol Pot or something like that. It's just like a total nonsense ideology. So it's not even like an option. So I think that a lot of times people kind of and anyway, so and then they realize that obviously mainstream kind of Republican politics or something like that in the United States is just kind of like wacky, kind of like it's not, what I mean, it's not delivering what they want either. But I think kind of an example that's kind of showing where it kind of comes from. I don't know if you remember Zizek's when he talks about Brecht and the column of tanks. You know that story? Or
I do remember him talking about Brecht. I don't remember exactly what he said.
yeah. So it's kind of like he says that like Brecht said that the only time that he ever considered joining the Communist Party as like a partisan was when he saw like a column of tanks driving towards I think it was like Berlin to crush a workers' protest. And I mean he's being ironic, but he also was kind of saying like it was because they were willing to do the thing that it was because they had like a sense of history or something, like it had to,
Mm.
and a sense of doing the visceral kind of decisive thing to crush the protest. Even though it sounds like the most anti-worker, anti-human thing you could do is to be in a tank crushing a protest, but it's kind of like he's saying that like it's kind of it shows that they're willing to do what they had to be done for the greater historical project or something like that. And I think that that kind of feeling, like that passion for the real or whatever they call it, I think that's a big deal for people, like where they kind of invest this kind of idea of, okay, standard kind of options are not really working out for me. How do I do the thing that other people are not willing to do, um, and solve the dilemma? And
Mm.
I think that's kind of like a psychological kind of like perspective or something that I think I don't think people say that obviously, like they don't think that directly maybe most of the time, but it's kind of I think that's part of why people kind of it's one of the steps they take towards, because I mean one of the things that is just so interesting to me is this idea that there's these political movements that are developing or expanding from where they were, at least of like a few hundred people. Like now online there's just thousands of people that are like tankies or whatever.
Right.
And I personally think that a lot of the ideas that underpin that are pretty just obviously wrong or something like that. Like they just seem like on their face wrong, a lot of them. And then where is that coming from then? What is the motivation behind that to actually solve that dilemma in their minds or whatever? I think that's part of it, is to kind of like push the limits to, so
Yeah, I think the thing that you said about right-wing people or alt-right people feeling the left, like the left project is just kind of inherently impossible. It's just sort of logically a failure or something.
yeah.
I think there's a lot of that involved with this, and I think it kind of um, it goes something like this. Like you see that just participating in the quote, normal stream of politics, all that does is produce kind of like normal results.
Yeah.
And then you realize I don't want a normal result. I want things to be substantially different than the system is designed to produce.
Yeah.
So what that requires of you is to come up with some kind of vision of what that would look like.
Yeah.
You have to, if you want something different, now you can't just kind of plug into the machine as it exists and then work the motions, and then you get kind of a little bit closer to something that you like. People sort of decide at some point that this machine doesn't do the thing that I want it to do. I need to come up with something else, so I need to have an idea of what that is. And I think that's where people get into this kind of like the tanky stuff, the far right nationalist stuff, the sort of pseudo traditionalist reactionary type stuff, like calling back to like medieval stuff or caliphate type politics or
Yeah.
whatever it is. Um, they figure out what they like as an aesthetic. It's like a kind of like what they think would be like a beautiful society, and
Yeah.
then they I don't know, because it's not like there's any real now. It's not like there's an alternative machine to plug into. You know,
Yeah.
it kind of becomes about you and how you're going to navigate things with carrying this like dream. You know,
Hmm.
and I think that's why it gets wrapped up with identity, like people's personas, and it becomes this whole like I'm going to make myself into a person that uh, I'm gonna become that machine, you know? Like
Yeah.
if society isn't doing that, then I'm gonna be something that does that.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember for years thinking of this kind of idea of just feeling like because, I was living in just my actual life, like I felt like I was living on the margins or something. Um, Feeling like if I could think through the problem, I could withdraw, like I could kind of pull back and think it through, and then I'd be able to kind of almost reinsert myself at the point that I wanted to be reinserted at, and then
Mm.
kind of like address the problem that way. Like
Yeah, I
it's
think
kind of
that's
like,
very common.
yeah, I think that, yeah, and I think just even kind of a sort of a related point that's kind of uh um it's from a different direction, so it might not make sense at first, but this idea that if you listen to how centrist politicians talk or just, mainstream politicians talk, um, there's this idea a lot of the time people think that they're not promising much and they're promising pretty standard things. But I think if you actually listen to a lot of the time when they're speaking or something like that, that they're offering radical um, alternatives in their own mind, but they just aren't actually. There's no policy behind it. Like if you
Yeah.
talk to, like I guess with Clinton and Chrétien in Canada, it was like jobs, jobs, jobs. This idea that, and if you listen to them, it's like, they'll say like every American that works hard could have a job or something like that, and it's not even true, really. It's just, but, or
Yeah, creating millions of jobs, growing the
yeah,
economy,
yeah,
you know, all these kinds of things.
and uh, I first really noticed that when I noticed that Bush in 2004 was talking about he said, he would use language like affordable health care for every American or something, like he used these kind of this language that if you only heard that in isolation and you're just like a random person that's hearing this from the news or something, it would sound pleasant or something like that. It's not necessarily all kind of this kind of radical talk, but then I think that that's when you do have, I think centrist people or like, people that have this kind of idea too. They think that they're a lot of the time they think they're heavily committed to the life as well or something, kind of like they're
Yeah.
very,
Oh yeah.
so I think that's something that people miss sometimes when they how aggressively people are willing to defend the status quo in that kind of like mild liberal way. And then because you can't explain why liberals would support, major wars or major kind of things if they were kind of generically progressive people that didn't have that underlying kind of like willingness to do what they had to do or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Like it's not that they're just sort of not as committed to some ideology or some political project as people on the radical fringes, whatnot. It's just that they have a different relation to the status quo,
Yeah.
I suppose. They kind of they see the status quo as something that has radical potential in a sense because that's what the politicians are promising, you know?
Yeah.
They just for them, I think this radical potential doesn't require the kind of force and kind of violent rupture and stuff that the people on the extremes
Yeah.
kind of put as like the base necessity of their politics.
Yeah. Like Tariq Ali has a kind of a saying. He says like the extreme center, where you've
Mm,
got people like Tony Blair or something like that. People that um, are very much committed to this idea of like they've got like a particular image of society that they're um, radically committed to, or people call it like the radical center or something like that too. So, which is kind of
yeah,
like a double entendre almost, because it's like saying we are radically committed to the status quo, except for kind of like bourgeois kind of like improvements kind of over time or something like that, like people becoming entrepreneurs or something, stuff like that. But it's still this kind of image of like it's almost absolutist in its own way, kind of thing. Yeah. So.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think that absolutism is interesting. There's something to that. Like when people get committed to that extent, this kind of like radical extent that we're talking about, I think that's when you start to decide, because you kind of develop a sort of vision for what society needs to be like, you start to close off other possibilities and make decisions about what's a real possibility and what is like a red herring or a distraction or just false and just like impossible.
Yeah.
So on the left, you kind of have this idea that capitalism has these contradictions that will just make class society always any kind of society based on class is always going to have these kinds of problems. So you need to get to a point where that isn't a fundamental organizational principle in your society, where there isn't class at the base of politics.
Yeah.
And on the right, you close off the possibility of that ever happening, and you sort of assign like that principle of stability to the nation, or a kind of sense of tradition and order that's you know supposedly organic and cultural and whatnot. And then I
Yeah.
think in the center, you have the same thing. You have this idea that there's always going to be disagreement. There's always going to be people with this view and with that view, and that stability is achieved when you're able to balance that in a way that allows progress to continue. So there's always this sort of abstract nothing at the center of these things, right?
Yeah.
Like classless society, um, the tradition or the nation or whatever, and progress achieved through a kind of balance of forces. Like there's none of those things are like they're not substantial, right? Like
Yeah.
you can't point to them and say like, well they have it and they don't. It's sort of an impression that you get, and I think that goes back into the sort of aesthetic dimension that uh, this stuff takes, you know?
Yeah. No, that reminds me of a thing that Orwell kind of said, which I thought was cool, was um, he was making fun of certain types of socialists, and he said that it, sometimes you get the impression that people that when they're imagining the future social society, um, are thinking almost as a person that doesn't have that had a toothache and then got rid of it or something like that. Like this idea that um,
Mm.
it's not you're not actually there's no actual like goal or it's just get rid of the pain that exists now or something. This idea that there's nothing really backing the idea other than, and I guess that's a standard criticism of liberalism as well, that it's almost like a framework for letting people do what they all would have otherwise wanted to do, but it's not a discussion of what people should actually be doing. It's like, like it's like Medicare for all or something like that. This idea, it's it's a framework for how you would treat illnesses, maybe, but it's not like if I'm healthy, what should I be doing? You know what I mean? It's like what should I? It's kind of I think that's interesting, but it's kind of I mean it's kind of it's very difficult to um it's almost like art or something like that. It's like you got this idea of you might be able to assess other art and say, this is good or this is bad or something, or you like this, you like that, you don't like that. But then what if you're an artist, what should you be making yourself? Like what is the correct thing to do or something? It's kind of I don't know, it's a very bizarre question when you start to kind of dig
Well,
into it,
I do think it's bizarre in the context of modern politics,
Yeah.
but I think that's just the fact that morality is not really something that we place at the center of politics anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, morality is about what you should or shouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like we've decided that politics should not be the domain where that question gets answered. That
Yeah.
you know, the secular principle of like people just sort of need to figure that out individually or within their own um, religious frameworks or a religious frameworks or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad, really. I'm not even trying to criticize that, but I think that's the reason that we have like these blank spaces, um, that morality's been extracted, but we also don't let any moral um, those institutions and those spaces that we have for morality, they are kind of like left out of uh, any kind of social issues, really.
Yeah.
Like when like healthcare, right? People argue for healthcare for all. It's not about. I mean, people do try to say things like everyone should have access to healthcare, but that's not how it gets argued at the policy level or whatnot. Like it becomes a matter of like, is this practical? Is this going to
Yeah.
save us money or whatever? Um, so I'm not trying to say that there's no moral um, valence to these things because I think all of this stuff is fundamentally a moral question, right? Like
Yeah.
people get spurred to do this because they have a moral sense about it. But that doesn't come from anywhere that is structured or supported socially
Yeah.
anymore. And I think that's why people just fly off in these really strange directions sometimes. Like people go to the left and get, it turn into various kinds of socialists or various stripes of socialism and stuff, because they don't have a sense that any one of these is necessarily better than the other, except that you just like one more than the other, you know?
Hmm.
You feel like imperialism and colonialism is some like an evil that hasn't really been repaired properly, so you get into that kind of like third worldist tanky sort of thing,
Yeah.
or you think that the inequality that exists in Western society as it is just that's the big issue, then you kind of become more of like a democratic socialist or something. I guess. I mean, everyone has their own reasons for these things, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Like, is this a bad thing if people are doing this? Do you
Um,
think?
I I don't know. I feel like I guess the issue is if like we're kind of looking at it from the perspective of like trying to avoid traps and things like that, and kind of like trying to avoid being scammed by people and kind of hooked into different things. I think that the question there is to just to be aware of this, even just to know that um, these are the kind of tendencies in thinking that these kind of situations produce. And then if you are looking for some sort of moral center from that or something, you kind of have to. I think it's a good starting point to kind of just feel through that and kind of like when you start to I don't know like at least that was helpful for me, to start to think in terms of morality and sources for that, and instead of just um, feeling confused by the sort of like constant jumble of politics or something,
Yeah,
So
I think that's a good position to have. I think these different sort of political, um, I don't even know what you would call it, political movements, political um, identities that you can adopt. They're sort of like mirrors of they're mirrors that trick you into thinking they're not mirroring your what you already want, you
yeah,
find them as some kind of solution to something where it's actually just like what you already feel about things, and it doesn't really structure your desire or anything. Well, actually, no, that's not true. That's exactly what it does do, is that it
yeah.
structures your desire instead of I don't know what I'm trying to say here
No, no,
exactly.
no. But yeah, it 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 uh it orders the meaning of your choices or something like that. Yeah, or something, I guess. Um, I'm not
Right.
sure.
What I'm trying to say though is that it it confuses you into thinking that it's something other than you just reflecting on your own
Yeah,
on your own sense of how the world is already. It's not an actual way out of anything.
Okay.
In the exact same way that the mainstream politics ends up sort of just producing solutions that don't really affect things, you're not actually affecting things in these fringes either, you know?
Yeah.
Now, I guess you could argue that, well, the point is to push these fringes into the center and make them more dominant and make them more influential and stuff. But I think the closer you get to the center, the closer these kind of fringe ideas start to actually interact with reality as it is, and then that sort reality assimilates them into the status quo
Sure.
that exists for a reason. It's not like the status quo is as it is just because of the ideological premises that we kind of have in the mainstream, you know, like
Yeah.
liberalism and whatever. That those are symptomatic, I think. I think it's
Yeah.
important to understand that if you that the real issue that made you want to go to the fringe or made you want to kind of adopt a radical position, you shouldn't confuse that impulse with, oh, I just need to pick something else on the menu. You know,
Yeah.
it's a moral outrage that you're feeling about society just not being able to satisfy whatever anxieties or whatever the evils that you see in the world that aren't being addressed.
Yeah.
That's
No,
not going
yeah.
to that's not going to change just by kind of getting on board with something else that is just slightly different in its ideas and whatnot. You know, I,
Sure. Yeah.
I guess I'm just sort of I feel like politics in general is not ever going to, in a funny way, it's not going to address these social issues
Okay.
because
Yeah.
because because as we said, they're grounded in like a moral decision, a collective moral decision that people like feel like, with the example of healthcare, that people need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
Um, you need to get for that to change. Everyone sort of has to really just feel that in their bones, and then that's going to happen regardless of the political circumstances.
Hmm.
You know, I'm not saying that it's just going to happen miraculously. Like things will change at the political level because of that collective will that people adopt, but it's a moral thing at its core. And if you're sort of shuffling through political movements that do not have a moral dimension at their core, you're not going to kind of get at that fundamental thing that I think needs to happen to affect change at the social level.
Yeah. And even if you do kind of achieve particular kind of reforms or even like sort of like system transformation or something like some giant change or something, um, I think there's still an underpinning kind of anxiety which won't be resolved through those particular social reforms. Like I don't think that like even if there were like some sort of transformation into some advanced form of socialism or something like that, or the equivalent for any given person, um, I think that there's more at play there than just the um, not having healthcare or something. I think that people are looking for a lot more than what the politics can deliver. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, let's say like you said, we get this advanced form of socialism. It has all these different kind of public services for people, and there's full employment, and there's even an end to a lot of wars and stuff. Um, that's all positive, of course. But if that just is a, if that doesn't reflect a really equally revolutionary change in people's minds about what their society ought to be like,
yeah,
then that's going to quickly turn into a caricature of itself.
yeah,
A system like that, they're you can't set them up so they're foolproof. People
yeah,
are going to corrupt it, or it's going to kind of run into issues with other societies, other countries, or political entities, or whatever that have a different interests in mind. And like take the Soviet Union for example. Like people like to one issue I had with the arguments for Marxism Leninism is it kind of prides itself on being the kind of socialism that's practical and gets things done, and it can look to history as proof of that. Like we achieve this, that's why we're going with Leninism instead of Trotskyism or anarchism or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the Soviet Union, okay, so it was there for like 70, 80 years, and now it's gone. And Russia and the post-Soviet countries, what benefit is that providing them today?
Yeah.
You can't really make the excuse that, oh well, the capitalist countries, pounced on them and did all this and that and the other thing. That's just excuses, like if
Yeah.
you sort of have to justify your actions or your support for something on the basis of like what it actually happened, what actually occurred. And
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I think you're right there. But
you could still be a Leninist. There's arguments for that, I guess. But
yeah.
I just find that particular argument sort of it exemplifies this whole issue that we're talking about of like that morality really needs to ground these things, or else it's just going to be another kind of empty thing that doesn't really work the solutions that you want in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure, where to go from here for this because I don't know. I think we had a good discussion about that, so I don't know.
Yeah, we solved it.
Yeah, we did it. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about now, or do you want to move on to questions? Or
well, yeah, let's take. Do we have a lot of questions this week?
We got some questions. We got some. Yeah, a lot of them are not actually that great, but we'll try to find some.
Well, hopefully, some of the conversations that we've been having on here will get people interested, and they can kind of ask questions based on these conversations.
Sure. One of them is, why is everyone hating on John Wayne? Should we be?
Like the cowboy guy?
Yeah, I don't know. See, that's the kind of thing that I don't know.
It's just homophobia, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Leave the man alone.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is not. Sorry about this. Let me see. What's Muslim Tom's take on Woody Allen's movies? Did we ask that already or no?
No. I haven't seen a lot of Woody Allen movies.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Match Point, which I thought was kind of cool. It was fine. What else have I seen by him? That may be it, actually.
Oh yeah, I haven't even seen that one. I mean, maybe I saw it once. I've seen every other movie by his. I've seen like 40 something of his movies. I really used to like him. I don't know. I still do, but like not like I don't know. I can't. It's harder to watch now after, Pizzagate stuff or whatever. So
yeah, that's actually made me a little interested in watching him.
Oh yeah.
I feel bad for the guy.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't like his sense of humor. It just doesn't really do anything. It seems so. He's not as smart as he thinks he is. I feel like there's a little bit of like you have to kind of think of him a certain way to kind of enjoy the movie, and I just like anything like that just puts me off. Where it's like more about the person's persona or something.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a bunch of bullshit because like I watch tons of stuff and enjoy tons of stuff that's just like that. But I guess it's the particular persona here that
sure.
That bugs me.
So Don, how do you feel about the philosophy of nonviolence?
Okay, so are we talking about like Gandhi or like
I guess
absolute pacifism, or how do we want
I
to take
think I think
this?
that's what it's supposed to be. I think it's more. I think that they're asking about, yeah, like the limits of it, like pacifism in general, or avoiding war at all costs, kind of thing, or like at high cost or something. Yeah.
Okay, you want to start this one off?
Yeah, I guess it's a personally. I do think that I like I like the idea. It's hard because I was thinking about this the other day that I want it to be something that everyone could like if it's true, like if philosophy of nonviolence is something that we should be embracing, it should be able to kind of survive any hard cases then, right? Like it should be something that even like a soldier should be able to decide that they should quit or something. Like it should be you should be able to say this to everyone instead of just kind of saying um, to your own kind of just kind of you don't want it to be just a matter of your own self-esteem, like being, oh, I'm nonviolent, therefore I'm good, and then other people you just don't, you know, it's just
Yeah, like
you,
patting
yeah,
yourself on the back for not
yeah,
living in a violent situation.
yeah, and um, so I find it hard in that kind of way, and things like World War II or something. World War II is a terrible war. A lot of bad things happen in it, but I feel like,
Debatable, but sure.
yeah, sure, but I think to myself, would I have been, anti-war, or would I have been like, no, 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 we got to go get rid of the Germans here, kind of thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, would I really, at the end of the day, really, really want to fight hard against that or something? And it's hard for me to buy that. I think, but at the same time, I've started reading a few books about this kind of stuff about, because it's kind of like a popular thing in some circles, like the Catholic worker movement and some of the different it's become kind of like a popular theme by Pope Francis and stuff. And I'm trying to like give it its due. And I think that even if you can't take it as like the limit case, I feel like it's still something really good to try to um, think through and kind of integrate into your life in terms of um, actually trying to put peace kind of at the center of things and trying not to, I mean, I'm not good at it yet, but like the idea of trying to avoid conflict where you can, trying to bring people together or something like that, instead of just kind of, pushing this. Because there's so many people online, especially I see it that like in Catholic and stuff, um, that seem very, very proud that they can kind of bully people about it or something instead of just kind of, or like, and uh, on the revolutionary left, you see a lot of people kind of like just pushing this idea of, even, I mean, one of the jokes I make about it is like saying that people shouldn't, there's a lot of the guillotine jokes, and I've been kind of making
Right.
a lot of jokes about that and saying, don't do that, don't make jokes about guillotines and stuff. And it's kind of like that way of my mind of kind of being like, should we actually be thinking in those terms or something like that instead of putting forward peace as the first step or something? Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's really just posturing. I think a lot of that really that rhetoric from leftists, it's just to sort of affirm for themselves that we're not like the liberals, guys. We hate those liberals.
Yeah,
They're
yeah, yeah,
stupid liberals. It's like, oh, okay, what are your policies? Well, we want health care and
yeah,
support gay marriage. And it's like, oh, okay, that's very different from the liberals. It's very interesting.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, but yeah, so nonviolence. I can't say that I really subscribe to that idea.
yeah.
But I don't get into fights with people or anything like that. So I, I'm not trying to say like the opposite is good or something like that.
Yeah,
That's kind of the trick of it, right? Like it's not a debate between like violence and nonviolence. So what really is the philosophy about? I think if you're really willing to argue that there's always like a better alternative to violence or something like that, um, you sort of have to accept that the other aspects of ways that we resolve conflicts are going to escalate a little bit as a result. Like
yeah,
if you don't have violence on the table to solve something, then you need to step it up in other areas. because
Okay.
you're not getting away with, you're not just going to eliminate certain conflicts because you've decided that nonviolence is the way to go.
Yeah.
So what's the answer there? I'm not really sure what the kind of common um, answers to that are.
Yeah.
But I believe in self-defense. Like you should be able to defend yourself with violence and force. And I certainly believe, like in certain situations, that it's legitimate to even instigate violence in a certain way. Like if you see, I don't know, someone like abusing a kid on the street or something, I think like you should be able to go over there and address that to just end it by whatever means, you know.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
No, I know what you mean. Um, yeah. I find
it
it's
shouldn't
just
be your it shouldn't be your first. It shouldn't be the first thing you go to, I guess.
yeah.
But yeah,
Um, another question for us is how can you spot Whitey?
I don't know, man. He's got a head start on everybody.
Salam alaikum. I need help finding a wife. Any advice?
Oh, a Muslim brother. Wa alaikum salam. Uh, I don't know, man. I kind of lucked out. I met somebody off Twitter and we just kind of hit it off and it's been working out great.
Hmm.
I know people who I mean I honestly don't really have any kind of experience with the Muslim uh scene in that regard, so I really don't know how it works for people. A lot of the single brothers I know are do not have anything positive to say about it. They're all having trouble too.
Yeah.
So the best advice I can give is don't be too hard on yourself. People are going to tell you a lot of things that you can't do this, you can't do that. You should do this way. You should do this way. This is the sunnah. This is the way it works in Sharia. Um, at the end of the day, you know you're in a situation that's if you're living in the West. I'm assuming this person is somebody in the West. That it makes it very difficult to kind of do things the traditional Muslim way, and I think it's a lot asking a lot for people to try to find like a relationship that way that's going to work.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I don't just don't be too hard on yourself about that kind of thing.
Sure. Here's another one for you. Does Tom play Fortnite? I saw the Chapo stream get killed by or kill. I don't know which. Remember which. And I saw someone named Islam Tom, and I was wondering if it was him.
No, that was definitely not me. I've never played Fortnite.
Okay.
I play basically two computer games these days. I play Red Orchestra 2, and I've been playing that for years. And I play Magic Arena, the Gathering game. And
Hmm.
and that's it for my gaming these days.
Yeah. I actually installed Steam today for the first
Hmm.
time. I mean, like in first time in years, and I might look around for some of these games and stuff. I can't really use streaming like games, but I could maybe I don't know figure something out there. I don't know. I think I don't
Yeah,
know, one of those war games or something. I don't
yeah.
know.
I told you about Blood Brothers.
Yeah,
Um,
you showed it to me. You showed me some videos about it. I think. Yeah.
yeah, that one will work offline. That's a
Sure.
really good game.
Yeah.
Uh, some turn-based
Um,
tactical stuff.
I've got a question for me. Would you rather endure Clockwork Orange style 6 months of ISIS execution videos or the 2009 Toronto Blue Jays? Now, I think it might be. I think what they might mean is the 2019. I think that it just was a typo. And I'm going to go with the Blue Jays. I want to see what they're doing this year. I want to see what's going on. I'm not really scared of it being. I mean, they not may not do well in terms of win record, which is important to some people, but for me, I just want to see those boys. See if they could congeal into I don't know some sort of force that I don't know is worth watching. So yeah, that's my take on that. So
I know how you feel about that. The Mariners are sort of in a similar position, and honestly, that's like maybe it's because the Mariners have never been really good, except for like 2001, I guess.
Yeah.
But I just really enjoy watching like a young bad team kind of
Yeah.
develop and get kind of good, and watching the different guys kind of figure their stuff out, or some of them don't really develop the way that people think they are, and that's always interesting to see. And I think that's one of the more enjoyable things about being a baseball fan, to be honest.
Yeah. And plus, the tickets will probably be cheap this year too, they say. So that
Right?
might be a
Yeah.
good thing. I think people are already trying to sell off some of the tickets they bought and stuff. So might be good for me at least to work that out. So yeah.
Yeah, it'd be cool. Living here in Chicago, I haven't been able to see the Mariners play since I left Seattle, and it would be
Yeah.
fun to catch them. Although I hate watching them play the White Sox because we always seem to lose against them. So
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
kind of a risky thing to
Well,
do.
if I come out there, we should see a Sox game or something. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Yeah. So how about we wrap it up there, I guess, for now.
Okay.
The other questions are not that interesting yet. So, yeah. So,
Sounds good. All right. See you next week, Donald.
yep. See ya. Bye.
Bye.
We don't fuck with police. Pockets on obese. Me, my little friend Tony. We get on a jet. OT. The doors got the sub. Shut. The drink help me function. You know how I'm bomb. Man, my shooter with me club. Jump up in that NASA like I'm jumping in a pool. I'm lactose, all this cheese, man. My